The best we can hope for currently to change the games industry into a more positive direction, to hold companies accountable for their scummy monetization practices, is that the government will swoop in and enact laws and legislations that will force these game companies to scale back the predatory forms of monetization. And while we are probably still years away from that happening, the fact of the matter is that this kind of conversation is still going on in government agencies across the world. Now, the alternative would be for consumers as a whole to unify and protest and not buy companies' products until they change their ways, affect their bottom line. But the fact remains that only enthusiasts really look into this stuff and take action when they hear news of scummy companies and their scummy ways. The fact remains that for the average Joe, this is all just normal and they don't look into this stuff. So, yeah, government intervention really right now looks to be the best way, as corporations won't voluntarily, out of the kindness of their heart, stop implementing scummy schemes if it makes them money. For them, money is the king of all their endeavors, and they'll easily sacrifice human lives to that end. Now, recently, we have been starting to see some activities from Congress against various AAA companies. We've got Massachusetts Democratic Senator Ed Markey, Florida Democratic Representative Kathy Castor, and Massachusetts Democratic Representative Lori Tran write letters to 12 AAA publishers telling them to stop with what they called manipulative design. And these are the letters in question. All of these are basically the same except for the names and addresses and companies listed here. The 12 publishers and their CEOs that they've sent these letters to are CEO of Activision Blizzard, Bobby Kotick. Scrolling down, you've got CEO of Walt Disney Company, Robert Chapek. Next up, we have CEO of Epic Games, Tim Sweeney, followed by CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella. Next up, CEO of Niantic, John Hank. Moving along, CEO or President/Representative Director of Nintendo, Shuntaro Furukawa. Next, we got CEO of Riot Games, Nicolo Laurent, followed by CEO of Roblox Corporation, David Baszucki. Next up, CEO of Sony Corporation, Michael Linton. Then there is Director and Global President and CEO of Spin Master, Max Rangel. And then finally, we have the last two, CEO of Take-Two, Strauss Zelnick, and CEO of Warner Brothers Entertainment, Ann Sarnoff. These are without question 12 of the biggest gaming corporations out there, and all of them certainly do take advantage of predatory monetization schemes, though I am rather shocked at the exclusion of two major companies, Electronic Arts and Ubisoft, those two are among the most well-known of publishers in the games industry, and also amongst the worst perpetrators when it comes to manipulative, predatory design. So hopefully they'll be writing letters to them as well, but the main point is that Congress is definitely looking into this stuff, and with these letters, they've outlined their stance on the issue of monetization mechanics like loot boxes pretty clearly. So I'm going to read this letter out loud and share my thoughts along the way. Dear insert CEO, we are writing to inquire about insert scummy publishers' intentions to comply with the United Kingdom's Age-Appropriate Design Code, AADC, within the United States. And obviously, given that this is a UK law, these companies based in the United States don't have to follow that law, but Congress is insisting that companies follow after the model that this UK law establishes. 70% of families have at least one child who plays video games. While online gaming can benefit children, risks range from the collection and monetization of children's data, exposure to violent content, online predators, and manipulative design. Now, when it comes to content violence, this is a discussion we've had in the past. Government always tends to over-exaggerate the effects of violent video games on children, and there is a rating system in place with the ESRB and PEGI, though they're not always effective, especially when it comes to scummy monetization and gambling. But as far as violence goes, the ESRB and similar organizations tend to cover all that and disclose the kinds of content you'll see in a game, the content descriptors. So that stuff for me is not as important. More important is online predators, manipulative design, and the collection and monetization of children's data. And adults also obviously are afflicted by this, but children in particular need to be looked after as they are more prone to be manipulated, to be goaded, and given they lack impulse control, they're bound to be easier to prey on. The prevalence of microtransactions, often encouraged through nudging, have led to high credit card bills for parents. So microtransactions is a specific issue that is called out in this letter, and the letter even goes further by stating loot boxes go one step further, encouraging purchase before a child knows what the bundle contains, akin to gambling. Honestly, we gotta stop calling it akin to gambling. It's literally gambling, with the only delineator being the law and the language of the law. But technically speaking, if it works like gambling, and it smells like gambling, and it looks like gambling, and it sounds like gambling, then it's gambling, which is exactly what loot boxes are. I mean, some of the imagery we have been seeing in games like NBA 2K, it's straight up just things like roulette and games you'd see in casinos. And when it comes to children, guess what? Their long-term goal isn't to save money, it's to use money to acquire the things that they want. And a lot of children are fond of video games and the cosmetics inside them, or the upgrades inside them. That's the stuff that they emotionally value most. That's a far more powerful motivator than even money itself, especially for children. So yeah, they're prone to engage in compulsive spending. Similarly to how if you give a kid $10 at a candy store, guess what? He's gonna spend all $10 on candy because that's what the kid desires in that present moment. And when they're playing Fortnite or any of the live services out there that prey on them, you know, FIFA in particular, with many children being fans of sports and its players, kids will easily choose to spend as much money as possible on that stuff, as they don't understand the long-term importance of financial stability, because that's just not their focus. They're kids. Children are uniquely vulnerable to manipulation and peer pressure associated with in-game purchases and loot boxes. As I've said before, kids lack impulse control. They want what they want, and they'll get it if they want it, if given the opportunity. And so companies are uniquely positioned to take advantage of that, to lure children into these addictive gameplay loops that encourage compulsive spending with low probabilities of obtaining highly desired rewards. Experts suggest that the ESRB ratings and parental controls are insufficient. Indeed, when it comes to the issue of microtransactions and loot boxes, they've tried to pretend like they're being proactive by putting up a website and by implementing kind of very fine print labels and very vague labels that somewhat hint at the existence of microtransactions and loot boxes. In-game spending and randomized rewards is how they frame it, but that's nowhere near enough information for parents to determine when looking at a game like FIFA that it's literally just a soccer-themed casino, especially the Ultimate Team mode that is the marquee mode of that franchise. So yeah, the ESRB has to do more, but given that the ESRB is a subsect of the ESA, which is lobbied by game corporations, and given they're all in it for profit, it's highly doubtful that unless government intervention happens, the ESRB will change their stance about giving FIFA, a game that EA recommends parents turn on, parental security, an E for everyone rating. The letter continues, additionally, the social interactions in online gaming allow cyber criminals to manipulate conversations and garner detailed personal information. In light of these threats, children and teens deserve strong online privacy safeguards. The letter then goes into the American law that was put in place to protect children. In light of these threats, children and teens deserve strong online privacy safeguards. Currently, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, COPPA, covers children aged 12 and under and prohibits the collection, use, or disclosure of children's personal information without notice to parents and parental consent. That's why there was that whole overhaul with YouTube when COPPA came in and scrutinized YouTube for not delineating the content that's meant to children versus the content that's meant for teens and adults, or the content that's, just more of a broad spectrum when it comes to age rating. But the content specifically targeting children allowed companies to essentially target ads to children, allow them to collect data on them, and engage in manipulative fashions, and so COPA cracked down on YouTube and forced content creators to label their content as whether they're for children or not, and channels that specifically made children's content were woefully negatively affected as they couldn't monetize to the level that they could before. So there's stuff like that that did happen with COPA, but it can certainly be argued that the collection of data from children and targeted ads and that kind of manipulation is morally certainly very questionable. And when it comes to actually taking money from them, when it comes to actually using children to take money away from their parents, who, you know, many of who do not know that FIFA allows the kids to spend en masse for the chance of getting, you know, freaking Lionel Messi via a card pack. They're getting screwed by all of this, and on top of that, children are negatively affected psychologically. Research has already determined that there is indeed a correlation between loot boxes and gambling, with one being able to potentially reinforce the other for those who engage in these kinds of activities, especially if they start at a young age. The letter then highlights ways that COPA currently isn't fully effective. However, young internet users deserve a new set of requirements and prohibitions that build on COPA. Signers of this letter have proposed legislation to extend privacy protections to teens, amend COPA to cover websites that should reasonably know that kids are on their platforms, and create new data minimization standards to stop websites from amassing troves of information about kids and teens, and beyond the amassing of information, the exploitation of their young minds and how susceptible they are to be lured into aggressively monetized gameplay loops. Then we have details on the UK's AADC law, which was created under Section 123 of the UK Data Protection Act 2018, requiring the UK Information Commissioner's Office, ICO, to draft and implement the Children's Code. The standards will apply to information society services, which are likely to be accessed by children under 18 in the UK, regardless of where the company is headquartered. The code seeks to empower children, and given that a child could be 7 or 17, indeed, you know, the sort of the universal thing that's established usually is that people under the age of 18 are still not considered to be quite adults. The protections vary by age range, which is smart. Obviously, a 7-year-old needs more protection than a 17-year-old, but still they're within the spectrum of minors and shouldn't be allowed to be preyed upon by companies to the degree that they currently can. The code includes 15 flexible standards that provide protections for children to learn and grow online. Standards range from privacy by default and data minimization to limits on nudge techniques and transparency standards. Limits on nudge techniques especially sticks out to me as a gaming channel. And keep in mind that we're not just talking about loot boxes. Those are the most extreme version of nudge techniques. Regular old microtransactions have those too, have those aplenty. Mobile games, for example, have timers on certain activities, and you have to buy microtransactions or premium currency to be able to accelerate that, which obviously preys on humans' instinctive lack of patience. Game design will be intentionally made worse. Issues will be intentionally introduced. Progression will be made to be purposely grindy so that players will throw up their hands, grow sick and tired, and say, you know what, screw it. I'm just going to buy the solution to these intentionally introduced issues. They intentionally make an experience more insufferable to manipulate players into paying to make that experience less insufferable. That's manipulation, and it's particularly effective on less developed minds like children and teens. Back to the letter, organizations that operate in the UK are expected to comply with the age-appropriate design code beginning on September 2nd, 2021, and companies have already begun to announce privacy policy changes that appear to be driven by efforts to comply with the AADC. This is because major corporation services are likely to be accessed in the UK even if they're based outside of the UK, and so they're saying here companies have already begun to announce privacy policy changes to account for the AADC. And so Congress is sending this letter to these 12 publishers, and hopefully they'll be sending out these letters to more, whether they'll comply. It is imperative that Congress acts with urgency to enact a strong privacy law for children and teens in the 21st century. As we work towards that goal in the meantime, we urge you to extend to American children and teens any privacy enhancements that you implement to comply with the AADC. Basically, until we make our own laws, you don't technically have to change your policies in the US to adhere to the AADC, but we're asking you, we're pressuring you into doing that. Congress then finishes off by requesting a response to the following questions by August 26, 2021. Number 1, do you intend to make changes to your product or services design or data collection and use to comply with the UK age-appropriate design code? And 2, will you implement these changes for users in the United States? If not, why not? If yes, will these changes be reflected on a public-facing website or in your terms of service? So it looks like they're probing to see how these companies will respond to the UK's age-appropriate, and all the meanwhile applying pressure and making it known that the government does believe that things like microtransactions, loot boxes, predatory designs, manipulative designs are all entirely unacceptable and that they need certain regulations. Even casinos have regulations that dictate that players must have a certain chance to be able to win, whereas with video games, it's all just free reign for the corporations. They can do whatever they want with no oversight, which is why they push the boundaries to the level that they have. And with these corporations, the only thing that will force change is if something affects the bottom line, which is why protests are so important, which is why government intervention and legal liabilities are so important, because that's the only thing these scumbag, greedy executives will listen to. It's also worth keeping in mind that this isn't the first time that the conversation of microtransactions and loot boxes has cropped up in the United States. The FTC has made a number of inquiries and a number of initiatives to try to start combating this. Back in 2009, a Republican introduced anti-loot box bill actually gathered bipartisan support from the Senate. It got support from both Republicans and Democrats alike, and in response, the ESA claimed that the legislation is flawed and riddled with inaccuracies. It doesn't reflect how video games work or how our industry strives to deliver innovative and compelling entertainment experiences to our audiences, yada yada yada. It's basically the kind of response you typically see from corporations to defend their corporate interests, like how Activision Blizzard, at the first sign of these harassment allegations coming to the surface, they immediately went on the defense and said that the facts are distorted, that the stories are old and out of context and all of this crap. All the meanwhile, both former and current Activision Blizzard employees spoke out to corroborate the allegations, to say, yeah, everything in that DFEH lawsuit is pretty much accurate. The ESEA here also naturally spotlighted how there are tools and information out there, parental controls and websites, basically useless shit, that in this letter, Congress is saying the current initiatives and the current tools and whatevers that are in place are clearly not enough. They have straight up outlined here that ESRB ratings and parental controls are insufficient, and I 100% agree there. Corporations continue to put the responsibility of protecting children from predatory video game monetization on parents, but it's the video game companies themselves that are engaging in that predatory monetization behavior and executing these predatory gameplay loops in the first place. It's like a murderer saying, well, I've put up a website that outlines ways that you can try to prevent from getting murdered, but I'm gonna murder someone, and the website's up so you can access that information, but I'm gonna continue to engage in my crime anyway. And if you do get killed, it's your fault for not reading the website and following the instructions thoroughly. It's not my fault that I was the one who pulled the trigger. It's that kind of logic where the perpetrator is the cause of the issue, and the only solution that they can offer, instead of just stopping the perpetration, is to say, hey, go to the website and it's all on you. Why should I stop doing the scummy thing or the crime that is forcing people to be more protective? But as far as I'm concerned, it is good to hear that companies are continuing to face pressure from legislators, that they may potentially have to look forward to legal scrutiny for their scummy behavior and their scummy business practices. But with all said and done, only time will tell whether this actually ends up going anywhere or whether this will ultimately peter out. Though the fact that this conversation is still happening even years after the Star Wars Battlefront 2 debacle gives me some hope, but man, is it taking a long time, as these things tend to do. But hey, if slow and steady wins the race, I am all in for slow and steady, as long as one of these days, these scummy companies and these scummy business practices get what's coming to them. Or at least that's one man's take on this latest development surrounding microtransactions and loot boxes and legislation surrounding it. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on the letter that the Congress of the United States sent to 12 of these major AAA gaming corporations who take advantage of manipulative design. Share your thoughts below, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.